Being alone is one of the cruelest tests of modern life. Not because of the absence of others, but because of the inevitable presence of oneself. When silence takes the place of everyday noise, when there is no one around to distract or validate us, something profound emerges. A discomfort, an unease, a sense of emptiness that can no longer be ignored. This emptiness is not new. It has always been present, disguised under commitments, hurried relationships, and endless notifications. The truth is that loneliness reveals what we spend our lives trying to hide, the distance between who we are and who we should be. And it is precisely in that space that anguish resides. It is not the lack of company that destroys us, but the lack of connection with ourselves. Søren Kierkegaard, one of the greatest divers into the human soul, saw this anguish as the symptom of an existence that has yet to find its truth. For him, the despair we feel when we are alone is not an emotional failure, but a spiritual alert, a call to authenticity. Loneliness is the mirror where we are forced to confront the freedom of being ourselves and the responsibility that comes with it. We flee from silence because it exposes us, because it reveals how lost we still are from ourselves. On the other side of this dive, Arthur Schopenhauer offers a radically different, yet complementary perspective. He does not fear solitude. He celebrates it. For Schopenhauer, the ability to be alone is not a weakness, but a mark of greatness. It is a sign of a mind that does not need external noise to feel alive. In his view, solitude is the refuge of elevated spirits, those who are not content with the mediocrity of distractions, those who have found a home and a fortress within themselves. This video is an invitation to traverse between these two shores, between the emptiness of loneliness and the fullness of solitude, between fleeing from oneself and the courage to inhabit oneself. Because what you feel, this silent discomfort, this pain that is hard to name, is not a mistake. It is a sign, an urgent request for you to stop running, stop losing yourself in others, and finally begin to return home, to within. Here, I do not offer easy consolation. What I offer is clarity, a direct, unmasked look at what it means to be alone, and how this experience, when well understood, can become the most liberating of your life. If you have made it this far, it is because something in you is tired of fleeing. And perhaps, just perhaps, you are ready for the truth. The emptiness you feel is not loneliness. It is longing for yourself. Loneliness, for many, is perceived as an emotional burden. But for Søren Kierkegaard, it is much more than that. It is an existential mirror. Loneliness is the experience of being face to face with oneself without excuses, distractions, or personas. And this encounter can be devastating when we spend our lives entirely committed to the task of being anything but who we truly are. According to Kierkegaard, the human being lives in constant tension between the real self and the idealized self. Instead of seeking our own truth, we prefer to adapt to the demands of a world that values appearances, status, and performance. We create an identity to survive socially, and then we cling to it as if it were true. But in the silence of loneliness, this facade begins to crumble. And when we have no one left to perform for, all that remains is the discomfort of realizing how far we are from ourselves. It is at this point that what Kierkegaard called existential despair arises. A state of suffering not caused by external events, but by the internal perception of being at odds with our essence. Despair is the inevitable result of self-denial. It is not fleeting sadness. It is a silent abyss between what we are and what we pretend to be. Loneliness lays bare this abyss because it eliminates the noise that used to muffle it. And as paradoxical as it may seem, this despair is a starting point. Kierkegaard saw it as a call to individual responsibility. Being alone is not the end, it is the beginning. It is in this uncomfortable void that the true work can begin, the work of becoming oneself. For him, a human being only achieves authenticity when they stop fleeing from themselves and accept the weight and the freedom of being who they are. But this process is not smooth. It requires courage to dive into the unknown that exists within us. It requires humility to admit that we do not know who we are, and persistence to keep searching nonetheless. It requires the willingness to abandon the mask, the character, the self we have constructed to please others or survive expectations. Loneliness, therefore, is a test. It forces you to answer a question that most prefer to ignore. Who are you when no one is watching? And even more, can you sustain your own company, or are you always fleeing? Kierkegaard warns us, fleeing from silence is fleeing from truth, and the consequence of this flight is living a life without roots, without meaning, without authenticity. A life where one is always surrounded but never truly present. But what if, instead of fleeing from loneliness, we learn to see it as a door? What if, instead of resisting silence, we learn to inhabit it? This is where another perspective comes in. Not that of anguish as an alarm, but that of solitude as a conquest. And no one spoke of this more clearly than Arthur Schopenhauer. In the next part, we will dive into his view on the power of being alone, and why, for him, this is not a sign of weakness, but of inner strength. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. While Kierkegaard makes us look inward with anguish and urgency, Arthur Schopenhauer invites us to remain in that interior with dignity and lucidity. For him, being alone is not an undesirable condition, but an affirmation of greatness. In his sharp words and relentless philosophy, Schopenhauer breaks with the romantic view of life in society and exposes a truth that many do not want to hear. The deeper an individual is, the more he distances himself from the superficiality of the masses, and this inevitably leads him to solitude. In the Aphorisms para a sabedoria de vida, Schopenhauer states that elevated minds seek solitude not as an escape, but as a refuge from mediocrity. For him, continuous interaction with others tends to be exhausting, noisy, and numbing. The common man distracts himself, becomes agitated, and feeds off the constant presence of others because he fears the emptiness of silence. The wise man, on the other hand, finds in silence a source of renewal. He is self-sufficient. And not because he is cold or insensitive, but because he has learned to sustain himself with what he has inside, and not with what he receives from outside. This type of presence is not built with motivational phrases or promises of instant self-knowledge. It requires refinement. It demands time, discipline, and a profound honesty with oneself. Schopenhauer knew this, and that is why he did not offer consolation. He offered confrontation. His thought is a direct blow against the neurotic need for social approval. He said that those who need to be surrounded all the time to feel alive have not yet discovered their own depth. And that is why solitude, in his philosophy, is a sign of strength, not because it isolates, but because it reveals. It shows who is capable of existing fully without depending on others' applause, conditioned affection, or the noise that anesthetizes. The authentic solitary, for Schopenhauer, is one who has become his own universe. He does not close himself off out of disdain for others, but out of awareness of the scarcity of depth in the outside world. This view, however, is not without sacrifices. Being alone requires enduring oneself, and for many, this is the hardest task of all, because when everything falls silent, the internal monsters scream. And it is precisely there that the true test begins. Can you coexist with your own thoughts, with your memories, your frustrations, your emptiness? Or do you need others all the time to avoid that confrontation? Schopenhauer shows us that those who master the art of solitude are those who have transformed their own interior into a habitable place, a sanctuary, a space for reflection, clarity, and power. And this is not learned in the rush, in the crowd, or in easy applause. It is learned in silence, in discomfort, in the patience of rebuilding oneself from within. But there is a point where Kierkegaard and Schopenhauer meet. Both knew that being alone can become unbearable when there is an internal void that has not yet been faced. Both knew that loneliness only transforms into solitude when there is something inside capable of filling that space. And this is precisely what leads us to the next inevitable question. Why do we feel such an intense emptiness when we are alone? What is inside us, or what is missing, that makes silence hurt so much? In the next part, we will explore the roots of this emptiness, not only from a philosophical perspective, but also a psychological one. The inner emptiness is not simply the absence of something, it is the constant presence of a lack. A silent hole that we cannot fill, no matter how hard we try. It appears in long nights, lonely Sundays, in the pauses between one notification and another. And the most distressing part is that it cannot be resolved with company, money, or distraction, because it is not outside. It is inside. The pain we feel when we are alone does not come merely from loneliness itself, but from the collapse of all the distractions we use to escape from ourselves. And when those distractions disappear, what remains is a brutal realization. Perhaps I have lived this far away from who I am. This emptiness is, in fact, the echo of my absence within myself. Psychology helps us understand this in depth. From an early age, we are conditioned to seek external validation. We are told what success is, what beauty is, what love is, what is accepted. We grow up trying to fit into these molds, adapting our behavior, our emotions, even our desires. And in this process, we lose touch with our essence. We learn to perform, but unlearn to feel. The result of this is an internal dissonance. We create an identity projected for the world, functional, adaptable, efficient, but that is not authentic. When we are surrounded by stimuli, this identity works well. But when the world falls silent, when the house is empty, when the phone screen goes dark, it crumbles. And what appears behind it is what has been silenced for years: the wounded child, the forgotten desire, the fear never faced, the unprocessed frustration. This is the true emptiness, the gap between who we are and who we allow ourselves to be. And that is why it hurts so much, because it carries the weight of all the renunciations we made out of fear of not being accepted. It charges us a very high emotional bill for having ignored our own truths. But there is something even deeper. Emptiness can also be a symptom of a life without inner direction. When we live only reacting to the world, chasing after others' expectations, without our own compass, the soul begins to empty, because the soul needs meaning, presence, purpose. And when all of this is replaced by empty goals, constant comparisons, and a frantic search for approval, the result is inevitable. We lose ourselves. The inner emptiness, then, is not something to be avoided at all costs. It is a sign, a symptom, a message from the unconscious saying, something is wrong here. It forces you to stop, to listen, to investigate, and above all, to rebuild. And this leads us to the next stage of the journey, the process of converting loneliness into solitude, where emptiness ceases to be lack and becomes space, where being alone ceases to be suffering and becomes a choice. In the next part, You will learn how to transform